Las mejores historias deslumbran, intrigan, emocionan, impresionan. Déjate sorprender con la Feria del Libro de Bucaramanga, Ulibro 2021. Historias asombrosas.
Hola, buenos días a todas las personas que están conectadas. Soy Giuseppe Caputo y me alegra mucho conversar hoy con André Aciman, autor de la muy famosa novela Llámame por tu nombre. Tengo esta edición de Alfaguara de hace varios años ya y estaremos, por supuesto, hablando de esta novela, pero también de su secuela, Encuéntrame, y de Variaciones Enigma. André Aciman me parece un maestro en la escritura del deseo y pues esa palabra deseo va a ser muy importante en nuestra charla. Me paso ahora en inglés para saludar y ya iniciar la conversación. André, it's such a joy and an honor to be able to speak with you. So thanks for your company today.
You're welcome. You're more than welcome. And it's a pleasure for me too. It really is.
Okay, so I have a first question for you, and it's about the first word of Call Me By Your Name, which is later.
Yeah.
And I was thinking in that word later, and desire as the experience and the art of postponing, but also the experience and the art of waiting. Oliver, in Call Me By Your Name, explicitly draws Elio, draws him apart and close permanently. In Enigma Variations, the narrator is willing to wait and to continue waiting, and waiting appears as an encounter with time. And then in Find Me, we find this experience of postponing and waiting in a very radical way. So I would like to ask you that. If you think of desire as an art of postponing and waiting.
I don't think it is. I don't think anyone who is a human being likes to wait for anything. It is something that you learn to put up with, and you basically learn that sometimes the things you want the most, you might have to wait for them. Eventually, which is a nice thing in life, is that eventually they are given to you. But you also have to realize that sometimes they come when it's too late, when you've already learned how to no longer to expect. Or there's the worst thing, which is that you realize that what you're waiting for may turn out to be disappointing. And so sometimes you find yourself saying, I will wait a bit longer just to make sure. And this just to make sure becomes itself the art that you're talking about. It is basically the learning to anticipate what you fear and yet at the same time long for. It is a combination of all forms of time, which is why in my latest book, one of the things that I say is that we do not live in the present. We don't know how to live in the present. We live in the future, in the conditional, in the past, in the future perfect, in the subjunctive, in the optative, but we seldom ever live in the present. But the most magical moments sometimes are given in the present. And you have to learn how to cuddle them, how to cherish it, because it will go away. It always goes away.
I love that to hear you talk about the present, because it's been my experience that desire is experienced in present tense, in an intense present tense.
Right.
So I felt such a challenge, a writing challenge, to write in the past tense about desire. How did you do that?
you don't know how to do it. There is no way to do it. You just go back in time and you remember what it was like. What it was like the first time when you were already wise enough, even at the age of 14, you were already smart enough to know that what you want desperately, because you're madly in love, what you want desperately may not be what you think it's going to be. And so you realize you always, because I think we don't know how to enjoy life in the present. We anticipate, and in anticipation, we also learn that the thing that we want the most not only may be disappointing, that you already know, but you know that it will be better in memory. And therefore, as you're experiencing the present, you're already opening a margin for the day in the future, maybe tomorrow, maybe later this afternoon, when you will want to remember what happened today with a clearer mind. And therefore, you always, I think this is my specialty, is that I always ruin the present. I know how to ruin the present. At the same time,
it's also an art.
I think we all ruin the present. But at the same time, you learn how to incubate the things that you will want to remember.
Yes.
And that's me.
Right before the pandemic,
Yes.
I was in Iowa City. That
Okay.
was February 2020. And we were having this conversation with Garth Greenwell and Brandon Taylor about the challenges of writing desire, of writing sex.
Right.
And I remember that I was telling them that, at least in Spanish, I feel there's a precarity of words.
No.
Like a small amount of words that you can, apparently, a small amount of words that you can use to write sex, and that there's always a challenge of what word to use for certain, parts of the body, etc.
Okay. Yeah,
it can be biological, it can be,
Yes.
Exactly. So after all this waiting, for example, in Call Me by Your Name, there's a lot of pages of this desire that is growing and growing and growing and growing. So what were your fears, or at the moment of writing, for example, the first kiss, the first sexual act? How was it for you to write that?
Well, it was enjoyable, because when you are writing, there's a screen between what you write on paper or on the computer and what you really, really experienced in life. And the transmutation onto the screen, for me, because I use a computer, is simple and easy. That is it's also fun, because you are dilating, you're extending the sexual act for as many pages as you want. You can extend the confession scene for as many pages. That's okay. It is, but then things change, and you realize that a sexual act cannot be told in the present tense. It has to be remembered by the character, which is why many times, many pages after the act, there is not only, oh my God, I remember that, when we had sex, this and this happened, but it's being said much later, which is the separation that you need. At the same time, you also are, and I think it is unavoidable, that in every sexual act, there is a moment of disappointment. Okay, it would be unnatural to say, oh, it was magnificent, it was excellent. There is always a moment of disappointment. There's also a moment of regret. Why did we do this? What happened? And so all these aspects of the sexual acts, the being told retrospectively, the disappointment, the regret, the anticipation, the desire to do it again because I'm not convinced it was that persuasive the first time. All these moments have to conflude in a few pages. And I think it doesn't require talent or art. It just basically, just sit down and write it. Just sit down and write it. That's how I did it. It did not, Call Me By Your Name is a novel that I wrote in about 3.5 months.
Oh,
So,
wow.
So I wasn't focused. I was just writing. I was, as it were, having sex with my computer.
That I love that. It's amazing, and it feels like that. Yeah. I was while you were speaking, I was remembering that you're a very intense reader of Marcel Proust,
Yes.
and we can feel or we can see that because of the remembrance that it's always a part of your books, but also because your novels are, we could say, essayistic novels,
Yes.
novels and essays, that is hybrid novels and essays.
Perfect.
So in what other ways has Proust inspired you?
Proust has inspired me in many, many ways. I wouldn't be the writer I am today if it were not for Marcel Proust. There are pages of Proust, I don't have to tell you this, that are extremely boring. And you say, oh my God, why didn't he have an editor? He didn't need this scene. This was totally, but it's normal. And you can say the same thing about me too. But in Proust, there are a few lessons that I learned. One is the sentence has to capture everything. You cannot, as in Hemingway, for example, you cannot truncate the experience because the sentence can only hold one idea. And a sentence that holds multiple ideas is automatically richer because it is able to contradict itself. And a human being who doesn't contradict himself you should not have friends like that, okay? Because a person because if you have no sense of irony, which means you have one voice on the top and another voice on the bottom, if you don't have two voices, then what kind of a human being are you? You're just simple and sort of superficial. But I find that in Proust, you always have a long sentence that is able to calibrate many, many voices at the same time. And that makes it. But the second thing about Proust, which I adore, is that he's always suspicious of human beings. You know, every human being is a house of contradiction. And therefore, I want to know what you really want, not what you say you want. I want to know what you love, not what you claim to love. And in Proust, you always have the ability to allow the contradiction, the contraries to coexist, not to resolve one another. And that, I think, is the genius of Proust. So that every human being is not a mask, but a series of masks with many, many interiorities. And it depends which one you want to examine. Because, and every mask is a contradiction of the other one. And that, for me, to know that this is how human beings are, is enriching. Because at that point, you realize that if I say I am in love with you, it does not mean that I don't hate you. You see what I'm saying? So that, in other words, I may want you, but I hate myself for wanting you. Mm-hmm. Now we have complication.
Yeah. I was also thinking, while I was listening to your previous answer, that sometimes when there are sex scenes, people expect that it's only going to be an exploration of pleasure. But sex, there's a catalog of emotions around sex, like boredom, deception, like you said. Yeah. It can be self-destruction, etc. And all that is also part. And sex is like a great place where all those contradictory emotions occur.
I totally agree. I mean, there are two moments in sex that I remember very well. One is, I want this to go on for another half hour.
Yes.
Then there's the opposite, which, come on, are we finished?
I want to run.
Okay. I mean, and you don't know. So the ability to appreciate both currents, which can happen with the same person at the same time, is complicates things. And I think that my readers have understood that we are not one voice. We are many, many threads, each of which is complicated.
Mhm. I would like to ask you now about the presence of opera.
Of
in your
what?
books. Opera?
Opera, yes. Oh,
Because how I understand opera, it's like this pact regarding the exteriority of feelings. And like the idea that the more external a feeling,
yeah.
the more real it is. And in, for example, in Latin America, where there's such a huge presence of the soap opera, and our sentimental education
Right.
has been through soap operas, I also think that's the pact. The more external a feeling, the more real it is. How do you, how has opera inspired you?
Opera for me is one fundamental thing. It is many things, of course, but it's one fundamental thing. You're talking about opera as in Verdi, Puccini, Wagner, etc., right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It is very complicated to transfer opera into prose. It is easier to do it in poetry because what opera does is it takes a moment in life and it makes it become necessarily enchanting. It has to be enchanting, otherwise the opera is a failed opera. If it doesn't enchant you, if it doesn't move you to the point where you want to cry, when Maria Callas sings, for example, you're almost on the verge of tears. And because she enchants you, and she means to enchant you, and that's what the job is. In writing, it's much more complicated to try to enchant your readers. You have to basically, in my case, the way to do it, and I think I learned this from Proust, is that you have to modulate your sentence in such a way that it becomes a musical. Or at least the reader may not know it is musical, but he feels transported, i.e. enchanted. You have to be, I can tell you the most grotesque things, and there are scenes in Call Me By Your Name that are truly grotesque. Okay, you remember one, I'm not gonna name it, because a lot of people have reacted to it. So, oh my God, but it's done poetically. It is done with love. It almost enchants you. When somebody goes to the bathroom, there's nothing enchanting about this, but you have to accompany it with a kind of soundtrack of the prose to generate the enchantment. And if I do not enchant you, I'm not doing my job.
Mm-hmm. I think you do it beautifully. And now that you're talking about these scenes that can be grotesque, or
yeah,
I'm thinking, for example, in Enigma Variations, the arousal of desire in the narrator comes through perversity when he hears a story about police abuse.
Oh yes.
So how do you think about these dark places where desire rises? Or
it's complicated because we have to, you talk about police, but there is a police readership that expects you to narrate moments that are sort of traditionally pleasurable. And of course, as a writer, you want to avoid those because everybody's written that, every movie has that. But when you have a moment that is difficult or complicated or even perverse, okay, then as a writer, and I do this all the time, I have to put myself there. I have to put myself in the position of the abused and of the abuser. But in other words, I have to transfer myself and to do things with my imagination that I would never do in my real life. You see what I'm saying? But as a writer, it's like being an actor. You can play an assassin, you can play an angel, okay? But you have to be able to transport yourself into the other person. If you cannot do that, then you are hampered as a writer and as an actor. It's the same thing. So yes, in Enigma Variation, there is a moment that is arousing, not just for the abuser, but I think it is also arousing in the reader.
Yes.
And the reader may feel, God, why am I aroused? This is disgusting. This is wrong. Okay, but you've been aroused. Okay, and that's the job of the writer, is to basically to take you there as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Another question I'd like to ask is about, I think traditionally there's been a dominant representation of homosexual desire, in which the object of desire is a straight person that ends up being gay.
Okay.
I think we can name lots and lots and lots of books. In Colombia, also there's a long tradition about that. How do you understand this type of desire, or why is there this? Why is this such a constant representation of homoerotic desire in literature?
In literature or in my books?
I would say in general, but let's. I think it's,
put it this way.
Let's talk about your book, but I think it's something general.
Well,
the straight man that ends up being gay.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let us be very, very honest. Do you know of a straight man who is not potentially, or if not sort of closeted?
I always think they are, but I think that's my desire speaking.
No, there's not a single one. Everybody, in my view, everybody is both, always, constantly. And so there are people who have basically put guards on themselves, and they cannot sort of step away. They will not allow themselves to step away. But as you know, all you need to do is get somebody to have 3 drinks, and they will tell you, they will tell you things that you say, my God, why did you tell me this? I used to, you know, or they may do something else, you know, with 3 drinks, 4 drinks. So essentially what happens is it's there. It's always there. It is, I think, a trope of the gay man who likes to seduce the straight man. Or the man who is married with a wife and who has children, and you want to seduce him because it's a victory for you. But that's a platitude, I think. That is a total platitude. It's unreal. Yeah, there are some people like that. Okay. There are some people who can only have sex with people that are, of course, already belonging to somebody else. Fine. But I think that trope is becoming tiresome, as is the trope of the gay couple that gets attacked, killed, beaten up, bullied, etc. That's tiresome too. Okay. What I wanted in my books was to show you that every person is potentially that way. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even need to be seduced. They're there. And what I do love is in one of the stories in Enigma Variations, it's the chapter on with Chloe, who is a girl that the narrator has been in love with all his life.
Yes.
And of course, he is in bed with his male lover, but he thinks of Chloe and he begins to want to have sex with the partner who's a male. Mm-hmm. And in other words, and of course he realizes, oh my God, what am I doing? And he says, well, I cannot stop now because it's going to look unnatural. So as you can see, everything becomes complicated. Yes. So there is, and I don't believe that there are people who are only gay or only straight. I don't believe.
And desire to me is desire of everything and desire of nothing.
Well,
so it's also that oscillation. André, I have a question about grief and loss.
Grief, yes.
And loss, which are also very near to desire. I'm thinking mostly on Find Me, but also in Enigma Variations. Okay. There's a death.
Okay.
That sort of saddens the good moments that desire comes. So, writing about loss, what have you recovered?
Well, when you say, as a writer, when you say, I have lost such and such, or so and so, or whatever. Writing about loss and grieving for it is a way of reacquiring what you have lost. In other words, writing, as in painting, allows you to imagine that you are holding what you no longer have in your hands. And I think that writing allows you for that, just as that writing can allow you to have wonderful love affairs that you may not have any longer. Okay, so writing allows for this transference that occurs. But grief is, for me, grief has been, you cannot grieve for someone that you have not loved.
Mm.
In other words, if you doubt that you ever loved someone, if you are grieving for them, then you have loved them. In other words, otherwise, a grief. What the ultimate expression of grief for me is, oh, you know what? I should write to so and so an email and tell them that. Wait a minute, they're dead.
Mm.
And at that point, you feel, damn it, why did you have to die? And a very, very, very good friend of mine died last year, and in a tragic situation. And of course, I thought, okay, he's dead, fine. But every week, I want to call him, I want to write to him, and and I catch myself, you can't do that because he's dead. And as you get older, let me tell you, more people die. And so you miss them, But at the same time, when you realize that you miss them, when you write about them, somehow you have managed to lay a sort of not a wreath, but you have essentially obliterated their death. And I love that about work. Art allows you to do that.
Yes. My next question is about religion and how religion enlightens desire, or can enlighten the way we think about desire, instead of just being an oppressive presence, which would also be a platitude. For example, in Enigma Variations, we have the chapel, this scene of the chapel. In Call Me By Your Name, there's the presence of the 7 words of Christ in the cross.
Yeah.
And then mysticism, I think there's a dialogue with mysticism, with the dark night of the soul, and this obsession to touch or be with the object of desire, which in mystic poetry would be God, but we can extend this. Yeah. So
in Spanish, you have 2 fantastic poets of religion.
Yes.
San Juan de la Cruz and what is it? Her name is
Santa Teresa.
Santa Teresa. You know, okay, yeah, of course. And ironically, I mentioned this because it matters to me because I'm Jewish. Both of them are conversos. So that already for me complicates the situation. But religion for me does not exist. I have never quarreled with God. I have never thought about religion. I have never, since I was a baby, never thought about religion, never cared about it. It was not in my family. I like the only feast that I like is Christmas, because I love the atmosphere of Christmas, period. But I'm not Christian, so it doesn't matter to me. But I do understand that religion, however, offers you an absolute. And most of us in the 21st century, I think, have changed the absolute from religion, God, whatever you want to call it, to love. So we have moved from God to love. And it was an easy transfer. But at the same time, I have my own doubts that love can provide the kind of absolute salvation, whatever you want to call it, that love can do that. It can do that in a moment, sometimes for half a day, and then it goes away.
Mhm.
But then I think the Christian religion is brilliant because it figured out that you need 7 days and you need to come back,
Yes.
because
I love that.
it doesn't last that long. And you
Mhm.
have to have lots of holidays, lots of saints' names, lots of feasts, because the human mind is unable to conceive of God for that.
Yes. Mhm. There's a dialogue between an intergenerational conversation between queer men. Not only the couple, Oliver, for example, is a bit older than Elio, but also because of the presence of the father. And then there's also these relations like teacher-student, father-son. Um, so I feel that father, for example, of Enigma Variations is part of a sandwiched generation. So in a way between the closet and the visibility. So I just wanted to ask about this intergenerational conversation about the age difference, but also of desire as an equalizer. I'm remembering this beautiful phrase that in Enigma Variations that says that there seemed to be no difference of age, just two men kissing.
Yes. Well, it depends, because it is very difficult. I have never written about two young men having an affair. In many ways, it didn't seem to interest me that much. I was more interested in the father of Paul in the first story of Enigma, the father who basically has a house in the vacation place, and when the family leaves, the boy leaves, the wife leaves, the mother leaves, he has an affair with a man. But you almost have a sense that it's almost closeted. And maybe that is the kind of relationship that even the father of Elio will make a confession to him, says, I never had what you had, though I got close, but it never happened. That is one way. But then you have Paul, what's his name? I forget, Elio and Michel. Now, Elio is a young man. He's basically a pianist. And there's Michel, who's much, much older, and who's an almost retired lawyer. And they have an affair, and they are totally in love with each other. And I don't think there is any moment when the younger person is the one who is less dominant than the older person. They swap roles constantly.
Yeah.
And I think that the idea of swapping roles is something that is essential to all three of my books.
Yeah.
The idea that I can be you, you can be me. It's easy. And I do think that this is something that can only exist in a gay couple, not necessarily with a man and a woman, though I could be wrong. In other words, the swapping of identities is much easier when it's a same-sex relationship. And that is also a very rich thing that can happen, which is I can become you, you can become me, and maybe I can become you tomorrow again, and you can become me the day after tomorrow, and I don't even know who I am anymore. And
I love that because, for example, the term sugar daddy, I think that makes desire when there's age difference sort of a taboo, and like there's a transaction, an economic transaction that needs to be done to make these two work. And so I that's why I don't like the term.
I hate it.
And I was going to ask you because call me by your name, the phrase, the sentence, the book and the movie has made it so popular that it's easy to start naturalizing it and like to just maybe you can stop thinking about what does that mean. And I love, like, what I was going to ask you was how did you come up with the title? And I think it's the idea of changing roles.
I think that the idea came to me, and when it came to me, of course, the wording, call me by your name, was extremely important to me. And it meant something. And of course, you're right, it has become a cliche, so that people say it and they don't understand what it, they don't feel that the whole explosion of the identity in call me by your name can occur. But it came to me in a very silly way, because I had two friends. They were both women, they were both partners, and they had the same name. And so I used to think of when they make love and they call each other the name, if it's the same name, it's like you're calling this other person by your own name. And you are transposing your identity to them, and they are transposing it back to you. So I said, what a privilege that is. And that is where the idea came.
I love it.
So, and I've never told my two friends that, which is ironic, because I didn't dare to tell them.
This next question can be difficult, or it can be very easy. But I was thinking about this sort of love triangle,
Okay.
in your books, which is father, son, and a lover.
Yeah.
But mostly, like, I feel there's a fulfillment of desire, either through the father in Enigma, or through the son in Call Me by Your Name.
Okay.
But not only that, like, I feel that in each book there seems to be like a more radical approach to this. In Enigma, the son falls in love with Nanny,
Right.
who looks exactly as his father. In Find Me, Elliot fathers his father's son named Oliver. So I feel there's a permanent sublimation of sex with the father. But how do you feel about this?
I think it's a very, very valid question. I have sometimes asked, when I used to teach Rousseau, and I would ask people to think of what is the most abominable thing you can ever think of that your mind refuses to go to. What would it be? And of course, everybody came up with something that was an abomination, but it wasn't real. I said, no. Think of having sex with your father. How does that? Can your mind go there? And I think that most minds cannot go there. Or there's the inhibition is so profound that you don't go there. In fact, you can, as you know, Sophocles says, you can dream of making love to your mother, but it is very unusual, very, very unusual for you to dream that you're making love to your father. That cannot happen. And so I do believe it is sublimated. It is something, it's such a strong taboo that even the person who has broken through all the taboos will have a difficulty breaking that one. And so my approach was to get as close to it without disturbing anybody, but it's there. It is suggested, it is pervasive. And I think that our civilization would be totally different if we were able to conceive of that as a normal thing. I have never been able to. I hope my sons have never been able to. But at the same time, it is something that is so profound to our whole Western thinking that, and in fact, if you look at Ovid, never happens. And Ovid has thought of every conceivable position, okay? Unless I'm mistaken and I've missed it, okay? But that is one thing that is such a strong taboo. But I do believe that breaking that taboo, if we were ever able to, would also allow us to become totally different people.
And also, I think the idea of killing the father has,
well, that's easy.
It's very installated. Like, it's very. But for example, like, I was talking the other day with a friend, and I told him, like, one kills, for example, the oppressor, but one doesn't kill the father because he's the father. And I think that idea has been very misinterpreted, and it's.
Well, I do believe that, I mean, when Freud speaks about the liar's complex, or because the father also wants to kill the son, by the way, But that's Freud never says that, okay? Because he's more concerned about the son, because the son is always a patient. The father is never a patient, okay? But that's a different issue. The fact is, killing the father is in many ways a symbolic alteration of what the real transaction is between father and son. If you see my point. In other words, when you talk about killing the father, no. What you're really saying is there's something else going on.
Yes.
And we're hiding it with a murder.
Yes. I have, we're closing, it's almost the time is over, but
Okay.
I wanted to ask you also about the change in perspectives from Call Me By Your Name to Find Me. In Call Me By Your Name, we know everything through Eliot's eyes.
Right.
So Oliver is object, not a subject. But in Find Me, we have also Oliver's perspective. So then both are subjects and both are objects of each other's story.
Yeah.
So how was it for you to write from Oliver's perspective and make him also a subject?
Well, one of the things that I thought was unfair on my part is that in making Oliver an object of desire for Elio, I never bothered to go into his head. I mean, I almost gave you some sense of what Oliver is, of who he is, of, how does he function? How does he quarrel with himself? Because Elio is constantly arguing with himself, but does Oliver argue with himself? We don't know. And so I thought I had created a very superficial straw man. So I wanted to give him his identity back. And I have written more about Oliver, though I don't think I will publish it in the next 5 years, okay? But Oliver interests me a great deal because he too is a person who has an identity, who has a sort of desires that are in conflict. Remember that he is going to get married to a woman, and at the same time, he is clearly not in love with that woman. And he likes his children, but he knows that the children are themselves screens for what he really wants in life. And he has to make a decision. At some point, he needs to make a decision. And you would think that Oliver is a person who jumps to decisions. Not necessarily. It's not that easy.
I wanted to ask you about Cavafis.
Yes.
And how have you been relating to his work, and also perhaps maybe other authors that have inspired you to think about desire and
Well, Cavafy came to me because I discovered him because I was reading Lawrence Darrow, the Alexandria Quartet. And in the Alexandria Quartet, not only is he mentioned many times, but he's also translated by Darrow himself. So there was a sense, so I was introduced to him that way. And of course, I felt very weird because I was reading him when I had already left Alexandria as a child. So I was already in Italy and in New York by the time I discovered Cavafy, but I was longing for Cavafy. But I also thought that Cavafy was a very, very frank and very candid man who wrote about desire, not necessarily in any concealed manner, which I thought was, wow, that took a lot of guts. That took a lot of what you might call daring to be able to claim that, the desire for a man is totally valid for a work of literature. And so there was him, and there was Proust as well, who's equally very, very candid about male-to-male desire. So I was in good company. I was basically being driven by both consciousnesses. And I read all of Cavafy, and I've read it many times. And so when I quoted at the end of Find Me, okay, there is a poem about, and I will mention that poem because it's called the Poseidonians. And it's a people that has essentially, they are Greek citizens who moved to Italy because that's what the Greeks always did. They founded colonies. And as the years go by, these Italian Greeks have forgotten their Greek identity. And one day every year, they celebrate their Greekness in the most awkward fashion because they have forgotten who they really are. And I think that that is also a symbol for the people that we forget we really are. And basically we recover it one day a year. And as I would like to say, it's always there. It's there. It doesn't go away, except some people have forgotten how to celebrate it.
Amazing. One of the most beautiful definitions or approaches to love I've read is by Julia Kristeva,
Yes.
French thinker, writer. And she says that love and marriage is the encounter of two childhoods. So in so many LGBT stories, the street or public places is the place where desire and love can occur. But in your books, it is the first home or the house of childhood is the place where love and desire occur. So how was this an intuitive decision? How did this happen? I think that's beautiful.
Well, I think that since it happens, you see, when you go outside of the house to experience desire, you're already denying desire. You're saying, I cannot do it in the house. I have to do it outside the house. In my case, I prefer the idea that it is such an intimate thing and it's such a beautiful, there are no proscriptions against it, that it can occur in your very own bedroom, not somebody else's, not in a public bathroom, as so many people are condemned to do, even today, okay? But in your own house, with the people that you love. Isn't that that's why I never wanted in my books to have a situation where the gay lover is policed or hounded or prosecuted. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be as natural as it can be, given all the complications in life.
Well, so now I have a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay.
It's okay. The first question is, what was the first reaction when you figured out someone wanted to represent your book in a movie?
Oh, the first reaction was fantastic. Excellent. I mean, who doesn't love that? You want to see, because you, among other things, not only it's because it's going to become more popular and you might make more money, it's more that you want to see what somebody else will do with what you have created. They may ruin it or they may make it better. And I was lucky. I was extremely lucky because I had two individuals, both of whom decided to give me back a movie that was exactly what I wanted. In fact, one of the things that I loved about the movie was that the boy speaks Italian at home, and he speaks English at home, and he also speaks French. And that is exactly how I grew up, with all three languages in the family, constantly. So in a way, though the book is only Italian and English, the film gave me back something that I had lost. So I was ecstatic. I was ecstatic. I thought the sex scenes were more muted, but I was happy to see that. I was very happy to see that, because I have come to the point where I don't want to see somebody, a drug addict, putting a needle in his arm and showing it to the camera. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see sex acts. I don't want to see violence. Leave it to my imagination. And I'm happier that way.
Okay, Edwin Delgado says, first, thank you for changing my life. Your story has a great importance in my life. and I am very grateful for that. My question is, what was your purpose or your objective of the book? What do you want it to convey with the story? I think you answered that, but if you wanted to add something.
No, I mean, I had no political, no mission statement, nothing like that. I wanted to have a nice story that was easy to write and gave me a lot of pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. I had nothing else.
Another question is, what are you writing now, or what's coming next?
Many things, many things. I've written some tales that are, some people call them metafictional, because they are about desire and about complicated desire. But I have decided maybe this is not the time for them. Just as the story with Oliver is not the time for it. But I'm writing a story about my years in Italy when I was an adolescent, and what happened to me in Italy when I was from 14 to the age of 17 before coming to America.
Was it northern Italy?
It was Rome.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Right in the
My father is from the south, from Calabria.
Oh, Calabria, of course. Okay, yeah.
And then one last question is, how important do you think it is for young people who suffer from family rejection, the position and support that Elliot's parents give to him?
Do you mean if it? I don't understand. Repeat the question.
Yeah, it's how important do you think it's the support and the position towards homosexuality that Elliot's parents have? Mm-hmm.
I think it makes the life difference. It's a total difference. To be accepted is a wonderful thing. To have the people that you love the most, your parents, to accept you as you are unconditionally is the best thing in the world. If they do not accept you, I've heard stories of people being kicked out of the house at the age of 15 because the father cannot tolerate the idea that his son is a homosexual, is a damnation. It's terrible. It's the worst thing you can do to a human being. It's as bad as the worst crime a parent can do to a child.
Mm-hmm.
It is unforgivable.
Yes. Then there are many messages about thank you for your work, and and Edwin insists that book changed his life. So I think that's a great way to close the conversation. Thank you so much, Andre, for your time, for your books. You've been a company for so many years, and it's great to be able to talk with you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I hope this was wonderful, and I hope it's been okay for you too. I hope.
Of course, it's been amazing. Yes.
So you call yourself Giuseppe, or
yes.
Okay.
Giuseppe, yes.
Giuseppe, and you have also a nickname like
Beppo.
What, Beppo?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to know. It's lovely. It's lovely. So thank you so much, Giuseppe.
I'll be very much eager to read the next book and those memoirs about your time in Rome.
All right.
Thank you again.
Thank you. You're gonna turn me off, or shall I turn myself off?
I think you can do
I can do myself. Okay, ciao.
Gracias a todas las personas que se conectaron y hasta la próxima.
Bye. Take care.
Las mejores historias deslumbran, intrigan